Kia ora everyone. Thanks so much for being here today for Sharesies Share Club. So our facilitator tonight is Bernard Hickey, Managing Editor of Newsroom Pro. Then joining him we've got Liz, who's the owner and financial planner at Moneymax. We've also got Tom sitting next to her, who's the Managing Editor at the Commission for Financial Capability. And we've also got Alexander here, who is a director at the Indigenous Health Solutions.
We've got a fantastic panel here today to get down and have some fun talking about money and investing and how to do it and what's happening in New Zealand and how things are changing, because they really are. I mean, just the amazing success of Sharesies and getting 68,000 people on their platform trading every day. And the idea of trading for 1 cent on the NZX. I mean, you can't buy anything with 1 cent. We don't even have any 1 cent coins in New Zealand. And also $5 that you can really get going with $5 in the same way that someone with $500,000 can. I mean, $5, that's a coffee in some parts of Auckland. And, you know, it's a great opportunity here tonight to talk about money, investing, and actually how to weave it into our lives. That's one of the things that I always find fun doing. Speaking of money and investing and news and what's happening in the world, I come to you this afternoon from Auckland, and if you came a little bit closer and had a sniff, you could smell the Sky City Convention Centre on my jersey. It is blowing a gale up there and blowing the flames of that fire, and it's actually had an impact on the stock exchange today with Sky City and Fletcher Building, of course, who are building the building. They're already a year late with that building being affected. And of course the other big news today, talking about the climate strike and what's going on in our world, did you know that Tiwai Point, the big aluminium smelter down in Invercargill, may well close? And you may think, well, what does that matter to me? Well, actually they suck up about 13% of New Zealand's electricity, which could, in an event, lower power prices, certainly lowered the share prices of some of the big power companies today, and is a really interesting debate for all of us to have around climate change, electricity use, money, investing, and I think these are the stories which help make the world go around, get us interested in thinking about what's valuable, what's useful, whether we should be trading or investing. And that's an interesting one to dive into. You know, is it fun to buy and sell shares very quickly? Should we hold on to things longer? What sort of things should we buy? Should we invest in shares or in property or both? And I wanted to start off today by talking to our panel about the actual business of, you know, why invest at all? Why not just have a big party every day and make sure that you spend every cent of your income, and some people do even more than that, to have fun every day. So I'll just start out there with Liz. Tell us why you think we should invest at all.
Well, my view is that you have a certain amount of income that comes to you in your life. You've got to decide when you're going to spend that income. Are you going to spend it now, a little bit later, or a lot later? That's entirely your choice, and everybody makes a different choice about that. You can choose to spend it all now, but you might want to put some aside to spend later. And if you do that, you want to make sure you're getting the best possible return on that money that you've set aside, because it could get eaten up by inflation or tax or that sort of thing. So I look upon investment as being money that you're going to spend later. And if you think of it that way, it's not quite so bad, because people seem to think, well, investing means I have to go without. It means I don't get to spend that money. It's like being on a diet where I have to go without food to lose weight or something. It's not like that. Investing is spending later, usually much later, and you just want to make sure you're getting the best possible return so that you can spend even more later on.
So you're saying we should look at saving as a bit like spending, but in a time machine.
That's
right.
It's
just changed in time.
It's just deferred spending. Yeah.
So, Tom, saving for retirement or saving for other sorts of things, how do you see the world of saving and investing? Is it something you should change through your life, or is it something that you should just set and forget? What's your thoughts?
Thanks, Bernard. So Some of you might know CFFC is the Office of the Retirement Commissioner, so sometimes I can get a lot of questions about retirement. And we're also the team that puts out Sorted. And Sorted has a lot of investment resources on there. And the key reason why I think we should be investing is basically our needs will go up over time. And if you think about funding that great long holiday after you step back from working called retirement, investing is one of the solutions to get us there. One of the things I like to do with the kids is ask them, well, what's money for? And of course, they might say it's for spending now, much like your first question. But one of the things I try to get across to them is money is also for growing. And one of the ways to grow is definitely through investing, through share investing is one of the ways we can cover our future needs over time.
So let's just go to the elephant in the room here. New Zealand is a place where housing values are high. Liz, you know, should we just go for the Kiwi dream, own the house, and that's all we need to do?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think investing is just you're buying a flash house and doing renovations to it, and you're pouring all your savings into their home, because then, of course, when they retire, they think, well, I can downsize my house and use the money I get from that to pay for my retirement. Well, sorry, but it doesn't work like that. I won't go into all the reasons why just now. But
can't you just take a chainsaw and slice it off and sell that?
You know, the thing is that by the time you retire, your house is quite old, and you want to go to a small, low maintenance place, and it's probably going to cost the same as your big house that you're selling. So people often don't actually make any money in that trade when they retire. So that's a bit of a myth that you can downsize and use that as your retirement fund. But property unquestionably has performed really, really well, especially in the last 10 years. And the reason it works so well, I'm going to use a big word here, it works well because of a thing called leverage. Now, leverage just means borrowing to invest. So you can invest, you can put down a deposit on a house, on a rental property, 50,000, 100,000, whatever, but you will get the capital gain on the full value of that house, not just the value of your deposit. So you're using other people's money to make more money. That's why property works so well, because it has that leverage factor. It multiplies your returns. And that's undeniable, but you do have to still make the right choices with what you do. But, I'm a big fan of property. I invest in property myself. It's a great way to grow your wealth really, really quickly, but it's not for everybody, because you have to do your homework, and there's a lot of hassles involved with that, because you've got to manage tenants, or you've got to find the right property to start with. You have to understand the numbers, manage the tenants, do all repairs and what have you. A lot of people say to me, I just don't want to go down that road. But then they don't know what else to invest in.
I've seen some of those landlords from hell and tenants from hell programs, yes, which are fun to watch. Alexander, this idea of investing for the future, for your own personal retirement or wealth, is that the case with every community? I mean, lots of people have different ways of thinking about their futures or working with other communities. What do you see in terms of people putting money aside? Is it always, for retirement?
So when we look at investing, and certainly from a Māori perspective, that thinking around investing in ourselves as well as our collective has existed as long as what we have. So that's nothing new. If you think of the idea of investing, it really is about looking first and foremostly around your knowledge around what is investments, what is savings, because we have generations that don't talk about it. So people don't know what they don't know. From my perspective, I also look at it from a seventh generation perspective. So it's not only about investing in savings right now, it's about the impacts that it has in 7 generations' time. If you look at the impacts of colonisation and the confiscation of our land and our other assets, you can actually see us in quite a detrimental space that we're slowly starting to get back through treaty settlements. But that actually plays an important part not only with our Māori space but also within our tauiwi or non-Māori space. So for example, one taxpayer supports 4 people in retirement right now. That will fundamentally shift, so it'll be one person supporting 8 people in retirement. So it'll take a brave government to make, some kind of change around superannuation. So you would want to start investing as soon as you could to help build your asset base or the amount of money that you have.
Yeah. That issue of long-term investing versus short-term trading or speculation, I wanted to dive into that. Tom, we've talked here about, putting your money in and using it for multi-generational gain. Or maybe we are having some fun, it's a bit like a bet, speculating one day here, another day out. What's the view on, whether you do long-term or short-term?
Yeah, so there's not always a black line between what is speculation and what is investing, but it's really good to start to make the distinction. And that's why it's one of the great things is this being a share club, because you are investing in portions of a company that makes money. The easiest way I can explain it is if you were to buy a farm. Now, if you were just land banking that, if you were not doing anything with that piece of land and just holding on to it in the hope that someone will pay more for it down the line, that would be more like speculation. And so you see a lot of that going on, right? With cryptocurrency, with Bitcoin, people are just taking a guess whether it's going to be worth more in the future or less in the future. With shares, what you're fundamentally doing is something different. It's more like you're buying the farm and you're looking at what it produces. You're making a call on that business, whether it's going to be profitable down the line, and that's what makes it more valuable. So not only is there what the company is producing, there's also the value of the company going up over time. And that's why it typically makes sense to look into something like the share market.
So that requires you to really think about what this company's doing, maybe look at, its valuation, its prospects.
That's what due diligence is about, yeah.
Yeah, but for a lot of people, that sounds like hard work. There must be other ways in which you can, get exposed to those companies or that sector or maybe that idea, but not have to do all the legwork of, sieving through the annual reports and listening to the conference calls and all that sort of thing. Liz, for those people who are, busy but do want exposure, what are the options?
Well, you can use an exchange-traded fund, which is what Sharesies is built on, managed funds, because, you can have the passive funds that just follow an index, so they mirror the shares that are included in an index, or you can have a more actively managed fund where you're paying a fee to someone to select those shares for you. So that is really investing as opposed to speculating. And I see speculating as really a high risk type thing where you're trying to pick winners. To me, it's a bit like backing racehorses. It's like, it's just gambling. It's you're taking a bet that a particular company is going to outperform the index, and it may or may not do that. And I think the big advantage of funds, exchange-traded funds, managed funds, whatever, is you get that spread across lots and lots of different underlying investments, which really significantly reduces your risk.
So these exchange-traded funds, how do they work? Do you put your money into this fund and then some person will, see the money and invest it into a company directly, or are we talking a bit more automated or algorithmic sort of thing?
It is kind of algorithmic with some of the funds because they will mirror the index. So if you take the NZX 50, the companies that make that up, it will mirror those shares in exactly the same proportion as the index does. So it becomes a fairly automated process. And then I think when you start doing that, then the decision that you're making is not which individual share you're going to buy, but which index you're going to follow. And maybe there's several of them. Maybe it's a New Zealand one, an Australian one, a share fund, and a bond fund. So then you take the decision up a level in terms of you're now looking at which asset class am I going to invest in, not which specific investment am I going to invest in. So it changes the investment decision.
So that business of, what do I invest in, what type of asset, whether it's a bond or a stock, or maybe a collection of both, how do you see that sort of shifting over a life cycle? When you're young and you're investing, maybe you're looking to save for a deposit on a house.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into that. I'm guessing there's a
Let's
few
dive
people
into
here
that. Yeah, there's probably a few
who
people.
are, saving for a deposit on a house. Obviously, KiwiSaver is one of those things that's changed the landscape a lot in the last decade. And the government now allows you to take money out of KiwiSaver to put it into a home. In fact, the Commissioner are looking at allowing you to take it out not only to buy your own home and live in it, but to buy a rental property that you don't live in, which is that's just an idea they're looking at. Tom, I mean, in terms of life cycle investing, talk us through the different types of assets that you might invest in at a different time in your life.
Yeah, this is one area that we've collaborated with Sharesies in the past on, because on Sorted there's something called the Investor Kickstarter, and that's really about getting to know what kind of investor you are. Are you a balanced investor? Are you a growth investor? Are you a more conservative investor? And the question is a little bit less, I think, of what age you are, but more of how long is it before you'll need the money, what they call your time horizon. Right? And so if you're investing, it depends what your goal is. What we're trying to advocate is really goal-based investing. So if your goal is to save for a first home, it depends how far away that is. If it's within the next 3 years, or maybe it's 4 to 9 years as sort of a medium term, or maybe it's even more long term if you're starting really early. If you're in your teens, for example, and investing on Sharesies, maybe your first home is a little bit farther out. And for each of those scenarios, you'd invest in a different way. The more time you have, typically, the more time you have to dial up your risk and actually to increase your allocation to shares and ride out any ups and downs that there might be in the market to make sure that your money will be there in order to hit your goal. But if you're going to invest in a first home within the next 3 years, your allocation to shares might be less to make sure that your money is actually there when you need it, and it doesn't happen, say, for example, during a downturn, when and your deposit might have shrunk considerably in the short term.
Let's just take a step back a bit into the whole business of, do we have enough money to save or invest? Because for a bunch of people in New Zealand, it's actually quite hard to have a bit of spare money, particularly after you've paid the rent and that sort of thing. Alexander, just thinking about those people who are, maybe a little bit closer to the edge and who are, thinking, how do I get ahead in this world where the rent's high and my income's not quite so high? What's important there in terms of, thinking about your future? Is it just about growing your income, or can you make sure, can you try to create a bit of a surplus that you can invest?
Well, I think it's always about acknowledging, what's our starting point. So if you look at Statistics New Zealand's latest data, the average, if you kind of all put in, the average New Zealand European person, if you take in everything like asset base, et cetera, is about $137,000 per person that happens to be New Zealand European. If you're Māori, your wealth distribution is nothing like that. It's 27,000, which is 110,000 less than obviously my European counterparts. So when I think of this idea of what is an asset, the first thing I think of is that every individual here in this room or on Facebook Live is actually their own asset primarily first, because your job is to obviously grow your own knowledge and grow your own financial capability. You can do that, obviously with organisations like Sharesies or websites like Sorted. And once you start there, then you can actually start kind of building your knowledge around what you can do short term. So, for example, with the communities that I work across the country, we're not dealing with people who have got hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've got people that might have $10 or $15 after they pay everything else. But yet, despite that, will still make their regular contributions towards KiwiSaver. But even then, there's an assumption, of course, that people don't even know that KiwiSaver is a form of investing, and therefore they are an investor, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the issues that for a lot of people, after they've paid the rent, there's not a lot of money left. And actually, I think, jumping on my soapbox, that one of the best ways to, improve the financial capability or the ability to save and invest is actually just to make sure people have more income after they've paid the rent. And that's where we need much more affordable housing and frankly, higher incomes, which, is a good debate to have. I mean, just stepping back, Alexander, what would you do? I'll make you Prime Minister for a day.
I plan to be Prime Minister in the next 10 years.
10 years, there you go. So what would you change? What would you do to make it better?
It's a really complex system, right? So I think that we should be talking about money all the way from primary school all the way through, actually, because it has such a profound impact on us. And ultimately, there are people that don't know what they don't know. Right? So if you don't know anything about investing, if you don't know anything about savings, if you don't know anything about debt, then how on earth are you going to find a way forward compared to other families that have regular conversations about what they're doing with their investments, about paying off debt? So for me, it starts in the education system. It has impacts in other sectors as well.
So I'm a fan of learning multiple languages in schools.
Yes.
I reckon we should have compulsory Māori language and a second language other than, or a third language other than English and Māori. So should we make learning about money compulsory in schools?
Yes, and I think that the language of investing is a good example. You know, let's not shy away from using jargon words like, assets or bonds, because actually learning that language helps you to understand the sector that you'll be, obviously investing in. And then often you'll talk to your own children or your own whānau or family about that as well. So that's when that 7th generation approach kicks in. So what you know will hopefully pass on to that generation, the next generation, and then you'll kind of hopefully build your wealth one step at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a journalist, so I see the world through stories, a bit like a carpenter has a hammer and everything looks like a nail. For me, everything looks like something you can deal with in stories. And I love looking at how the stock market and markets internationally are working, as much because they're like signposts. They're like a dashboard on a global story or a local story. I mean, for example, today we've just had an amazing fire in the centre of Auckland, which has actually been reflected on our stock market. We're seeing this extraordinary thing going on at the moment where interest rates in many parts of the world are negative. Can you imagine that? You pay the bank or the government to look after your money. I can't get my head around that. So stories, I reckon, are a really interesting thing. Tom, I mean, I'm going to make... So Alexander is the Prime Minister. You're going to be the Education Minister. And I'm the Finance Minister because I've always wanted to be the Finance Minister. And I'm going to give you as much as you want to, solve some of these issues in schools with kids maybe not understanding this or knowing about it before they, stumble into a really bad car loan or whatever it is when they get out of school.
Yeah, so to me, the answer and the solution would be more of what we are currently working on, because there's an entire team at Sorted working on something called Sorted in Schools. And if you hadn't heard already, the approach is really interesting because it's not about introducing financial capability as its own subject, but it's actually about wrapping it into existing subjects. And some of them you can guess right away, like math is easy to, but did you know that you could actually put financial capability into digital technology or even health? And if you think...
Tell me how you do that.
Yeah. So if you think about if you're organizing a sports team and you're moving that sports team from point A to point B for a tournament, there's a whole financial aspect to doing that. So you need to budget, you need to raise funds, you need to do fundraising, you need to make sure that everything is in place to move that sports team in order to be successful. So it's not only about the training, it's about the financial training. So at the moment, that's being rolled out throughout the New Zealand curriculum. The last numbers I've seen is like 180,000 kids who are already participating with that material that's being rolled out through the country. So it's important to know, and for me, it would be about rolling it out faster, expanding it a lot faster.
So I'm a parent, I've got a couple of kids, and I often think about this, how are they going to see the world around them? I'm working as fast as I can to make sure they've got some money for deposits and houses to help them out. But also, maybe I need to tell them some stories or, get them interested in money. Liz, I mean, how would you, if you've got kids, young kids, or you're thinking about your long-term future, how would you, educate them, get them interested in money? What would you do?
I think it's quite easy because And honestly, I think that the greatest gift you can give your children is to teach them how to manage their money. And I see a lot of people at the end of their working life, and I look at how much money they've accumulated, and quite honestly, the difference between the ones that have got a lot and the ones that haven't got much is nothing to do with their education or their income. It's to do with their ability to manage money. So that's the greatest gift you can give your kids, is to teach them. And the best way to start is with pocket money. And what I like to do is, just gradually increase your kids' pocket money as they get older, up until the point when they leave home, where they're actually managing their own little budget. So you're giving them enough money to pay for their clothes, for their tickets to the movies, their transport or whatever. Your kids should leave home knowing how to budget, how to make their money last. So you just start off when they're really little, give them enough to, buy their lollies and ice creams and stuff, and then enough to buy their, the birthday presents for their friends, I remember being a parent and having to, there's always some kid's birthday party and you think, oh God, there goes another $20 on a present. But, give them enough so they can have to think about deferring their spending so they've got enough to be able to buy a present for their friend. So you could just gradually increase their budget. And I would say even in their last year, give them a credit card or something with a really low limit on it, and teach them about credit cards, because you can guarantee the minute they hit the workplace, they're going to get offered a credit card. They have to learn how that works.
And the power of compounding interest and the most evil and powerful force in the world, which is negative compounding interest.
Right.
Compounding interest.
So, although your schools have a role to play definitely in financial education, so do parents. And it can be really easy to do. It's having conversations about money at home. And having conversations with other people. And one of the most taboo subjects of all is money. We talk about our love lives, our intimate details of our health, all sorts of things, but we don't talk to other people about money, and we need to start having those conversations.
Yeah, we need more reality TV shows about money, I think, and as well as The Block, I suppose. I'll avoid using Mark Richardson to do it, I think. Maybe it's Sharesies. Brooke, because there are a bunch of people who set up accounts for their kids on Sharesies. Is that right? Because I've heard from a couple of people that've done that. Are you seeing much of that with kids' accounts on Sharesies and buying shares in Apple and whoever owns Fortnite?
Yeah, we've got over 4,000 kids on Sharesies now, and we really share that same view that Alexander mentioned in terms of we really want to help remove that taboo around money, and one key way is to help those conversations happen in households or between families, and making investing and money and compounding returns just become part of our daily conversations, or make it really easy. And so I think we're really proud that we're seeing that grow and being able to unlock that so people can have that conversation. But it doesn't have to be parents either. It can be any well-meaning adult can set that up for a child. And what I love is that we can share that knowledge early and have that, in the future, more and more of us can have that seventh generation perspective as more and more of us, are able to be included in this world.
Yeah, I mean, what do people think about? I'm thinking about this. I've got a 17-year-old daughter who needs to spend less money on lollies and ice cream. So I'm thinking maybe it's set up a Sharesies account and say
talk about it with her.
Yeah. Good. No, she'll love that when I give her money to not spend on lollies and on ice cream. Just going back into the business of thinking about how our investing changes through our lifestyle for our particular needs and the sort of life events that can creep up on us, and to sort of get down and talk about the tough things in life. Occasionally people get sick or divorced or lose a job or whatever. Alexander, I mean, how can saving and investing set you up to be a bit resilient around those sorts of life events? And how can they change the way that you do investing and saving?
Well, life events always happen, right? That's just what it takes to be
As
alive.
they say, shit happens.
It does, right? And then the brown stuff hits the fan and then you make a run for it.
Yep.
So I guess for me, it's always acknowledging, assuming, of course, that we've got the asset base to be able to do this, right?
That's often
that's
often,
right?
yeah. That's often the way that people are much more resilient in handling those life events when they do have assets, and they do have an ability to pull money out of some place and put it somewhere else, or use it to take a break for a few months or whatever. So it's about having some resilience and assets. I mean, how do you build it up and get ready for it?
So ideally you would want to try to work on your debts first and foremostly, because what's the point of having any kind of savings or making investments if you've got, and by debts I don't mean like a mortgage, I mean things like maybe a credit card, or you might be $10,000. I don't know, you're taking out a personal loan or something. Do you know what I mean? You'd want to clear some of that first.
Yeah. I mean, because I'm always amazed when I hear this, and I'll ask people to put up their hands, the really honest ones. Who here has both a savings account and a significant personal loan or credit card? Alrighty. I can't quite work that one out. So, how should we think about that stuff?
It's always a personal journey, but one of the things that I had to do, was to clear a $20,000 credit card, because like what you were saying, I wasn't actually taught many years ago about credit cards and all those other things, and when I hit uni, I was given it with a $2,000 limit and was just told to kind of go for gold, and then you get your statement back with interest, and then they come to you after you pay it off and they're like, man, you're doing such a great job, we're going to increase your limit by $5,000, and then before you know it, there's the brown stuff, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it was systematically working on actually paying off my debts first. Once I did that, then it was looking at, okay, how am I going to ensure that when the storm hits, I'm going to be able to look after myself financially. So I set myself a goal of saving between $2,000 to $3,000, which I called a rainy day account. And then once I set up that account, then I just knew, say for example, I had a flat tire or something came up, a contract didn't come through, I lost a job, at least I'd have something that would last me for at least a couple, maybe 6-7 weeks, maybe 2 months max. Once those things were built, then I looked at how could I use money towards investing and getting myself ahead. But for me, my approach was always tackling debt first.
Get rid of the debt.
The smaller debt.
Yeah.
There's other debts that'll work for you, like a mortgage, for example, because obviously you'll have a bigger asset base like a house, but there are other debts that don't serve you. And I guess that's the thing with money, right? It's like any kind of relationship. What is your relationship like with money? Does it help you get ahead, or is it abusive?
And does it suck you dry?
Yeah.
So, Tom, this business of debts, clearing debts, having savings and debt, I mean, what are you saying out there in the schools and to those communities where, the credit card is a real thing?
Well, you make a really good point about resilience, too, that I wanted to mention. Have you ever talked to an architect about how they use the word resilience? It's a little bit different than the rest of us do. So they automatically, when we think of resilience, it's how strong we can be against the storm or something like that. An architect will be measuring resilience as how fast something can come back to its prior state. So, a building might, shake a bit, but then come back. And I'd say that when you're thinking about your investing, that actually you're increasing your resilience. You're increasing your ability to bounce back from all the things that can happen in life. So it's got to be one of our goals. In terms of credit cards and debt, I was explaining to some people earlier how our minds work with money, the difference between the way our minds work with cash and the difference between the way our minds work on credit cards. If you think about it, if you're holding cash, there's this trade-off, right? You have this pleasure of getting something and this pain of letting go of the cash. And you make that trade-off right there, and your brain says, is this worth it, or is this not worth it? Is this not? With a credit card, it's all pleasure, right? You're swiping that, and the pain doesn't come until like a month later when you see that balance either on screen or, and it's just painful then because our minds aren't really good at, in aggregate. You can remember what you spent on, say, a drink or something like that, but how much you spent on drinks over the past month, really hard to remember.
But that's because part of that credit card accepts you. It even tells you that it accepts you. And if it doesn't, then it says decline, right? And so when you're geared towards being given positive reinforcement by having accepted, exactly, it even tells you have a good day, thank you for using me. You know, it's up until it says decline, that's the problem.
Yeah.
So part of that, like I said, it's a relationship.
Yeah, and it can give you a little, buzz. Like I use my phone to like tap and pay, and there's that little bing, and it just goes straight to my amygdala, and I feel so good. And
An electric shock instead.
yeah, no, that's the way it should be done. So Liz, talking about life events and how to be ready for them. One of the biggest things determining people's wealth and often health in later life is what's happening with their relationships and marriages and divorces and relationship breakups and those sorts of things. What do you see for people, particularly women who often seem to come out worse out of these situations than men can? What are you seeing, and how should people get ready for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a real problem out there at the moment. There's a lot of women who are reaching their 50s or 60s with basically nothing. And that's because they've been through, divorce, redundancy, mental health problems, business failures, whatever. There is an epidemic of it because, previous generations stayed together a lot. The divorce rate wasn't so high. They didn't have the redundancy issues in that generation. So now we're seeing a whole different pattern, and we're seeing these people reaching retirement with either no house or a house with a large mortgage on it. And it is a real issue, and it's something to be aware of, and it's about that resilience that you've been talking about. Women in particular seem to suffer more, just the way it is, I think, because women, and I think women do now need to be a lot more financially independent, and I'm seeing that certainly in the younger generations coming through.
So keep your own bank account and your own KiwiSaver account.
It's much more common now for young couples to manage their money completely separately, whereas my generation, the minute you got married, that was it. It was you just joined up your income and your expenses, and that was a completely different pattern there now.
Well, they actually call it sexually transmitted debt. But that for our wakine, for our woman, that is, especially of a certain generation, not that I'm implying that this applies to you, of course, that's why I'm going to look away, but there is a generation where, of course, women stayed home and looked after tamariki and kids and therefore left their husbands, and so therefore their asset base isn't as huge. But that's what they coined anyway.
So I think there is a real close relationship between relationships and money and how you manage your money. And I think, now with relationships being so fluid, people are reluctant to take the plunge and throw everything into the pot because they think, well, actually this might not last, 3 to 5 years or whatever. And so there is a lot more caution out there, which I think is probably wise. But on the other hand, I think if you are, to have a really fully committed relationship, you do kind of need to be joined up financially as well. But to have discussions about how you manage the money, because a lot of relationships break down through arguments over money.
Yeah. Yes, so there's some difficult conversations for everyone to have tonight, maybe. I just wanted to sort of step back into the current times, just to think about how people are changing their views on investing. We've gone through the last decade since the global financial crisis. Tom, what are you seeing in terms of people's changing attitudes towards investing and saving, in the bank versus the stock market or property or whatever? What are you seeing out there? How it's different?
I'm smiling because I always seem to be one question behind you, Bernard, when you're asking. So I'm still thinking about that one you were asking before about the money conversations, because we know that these are some of the most difficult conversations to have. So we put together a whole bunch of resources to help people open up about money. So if you go to nowwearetalking.org.nz, you'll see a lot of tips and support and ideas about how to start that conversation, how to get it going well, how to and how to reroute it when it's not going well, how to prepare for it, because the conversations between partners, especially, we should be able to achieve much more together than we ever can on our own. But without that conversation happening, those shared goals can never happen. So sorry to just hop back to that other question, but nowwearetalking.org.nz can really give it. Now we are talking. Yeah,
Right.
trying to open up about money. And you were asking then about attitudes, saving and investing. You know, we do a lot of work in the KiwiSaver space and investing there. And of course, the challenges are just getting people used to the idea that this is not a savings account, that it is an investing account. And all of you here in this room, since you're
Hang on a minute. So what's the difference between savings and investing?
Yep. So I explain it this way. Liz will probably have a different way, but you know we'll get there to the same place, I bet. Saving is really setting aside cash. Investing is taking that cash and putting it into something, into an asset that returns something to you, that produces something. Let's go back to that farm, for example. You know, when we're investing, particularly in shares, you're buying a portion of a company. You are part owner of that company that is spinning off profits. And that's one of the ways to evaluate whether it's a good investment or not. So investing needs to return money back into your pocket.
Well, does it really? Maybe it can be like Uber and Google in the early days and WeWork, where they make losses seemingly forever until the moment they make a profit and then it explodes. So it doesn't necessarily have to be about dividends.
Yeah, those are in the start. But the goal of a company is essentially to spin off profits, right? To grow in. It can be in the longer run, and very often if we're getting in early, we're helping.
Really long run.
We're helping it to get started. But it's one of. I really like that definition of an asset and liability, and to keep it simple, that an asset puts money back into your pocket, a liability takes money out, you know, and back to your point about whether, you know, the family home, is that an asset or a liability, and depending on the time, it can be a big liability.
So Liz, what are you seeing? You work with a lot of people who are saving for their retirement or dealing with their financial issues at the time. How has things changed in the last 10 years or so since the global financial crisis in terms of the sorts of things people are investing in, or at least thinking about, maybe a different way they're thinking about it? What are you seeing?
Well, I think we've had some really good investment returns since the GFC, and that's created a bit of a false sense of security, shall we say. And we've had KiwiSaver in that time as well. Yeah. So that's made a massive difference. I think, you know, KiwiSaver combined with those, you know, strong upward trends, you know, good economic growth everywhere, everyone's feeling positive and happy, and they're trying out new forms of investment. It's one of the reasons Sharesies has grown, I'm sure. But I think we're now at the cusp of moving into a whole different scenario, because, you know, we've got a lot of people now who've only ever really invested in KiwiSaver and seen those positive returns. We're going to a period where we could see quite significant negative returns. And people have forgotten, you know, the GFC was, 10 or 11 years ago. People have forgotten about that already. And
are you saying that people have shorter attention spans now?
Yeah, well, yeah. I think, you know, we've been lulled into this, you know, feeling that investments just keep going up all the time, and they don't. And I think we'll see some lessons learned over the next 5 years or so, where it will really test people's attitudes towards risk, I think, and make them question, you know, what sort of investors they are. So those lessons are yet to come, but, you know, that's part of being an investor. You know, the typical pattern is you have, you know, if you have a long sustained period of good returns, after that comes the not so good returns. But, you know, that's nothing to be afraid of, because volatility in the markets is what creates the returns. So
there's also a level of patience as well. You know, 60-second abs do not work. Yeah. Trust me on this, they don't work. And there's some great psychology behind it. You know, and within my own profession, there's some great psychology that looks at what's the difference between people that invest and people that don't. And people that invest cash definitely look towards building, like I talked about, the asset base now, but knowing that by making small changes, they can increase their wealth long term. And then you've got people that just want an instant gratification. They just want it now. And so in some ways, what we're asking is how do we kind of work with those people that like that instant gratification, that like getting that hit straight away?
Are you saying it's all about impulse control?
Yes.
Yeah, no, there's some really interesting psychology and behavioural economics around about impulse control.
The other thing I was going
Have you heard of that test that they did with the kids and the marshmallows? It's quite a famous one.
Yeah, no, it's
Where
those lawsuits to come back though when those kids are adults. To have their patients tested about how many marshmallows they eat or don't eat.
But that's what it's all about, and they've proved that those kids who can have that deferred gratification do much better in life.
That's right.
So
Here's the thing about that experiment that really I like though. If you ask those same kids if they would like one marshmallow at 3 o'clock tomorrow or 2 marshmallows at 3:15, every single one of them would pick the 3:15 at 2 because there's some distance away from it. So my thing with that is it's not just about impulse control. It's actually about making good decisions about your future. Just getting some distance away from it, and actually people can make better decisions.
But those marshmallows smell so good.
Yeah, but if they're not right there, if we're talking about 3 o'clock tomorrow,
Yeah.
you can actually make a better decision.
Speaking of marshmallows, just imagine if you're walking down the street and you see a billboard out the front of the bank that says, "Come on in and give us your savings, and we'll ask you for more money every month after you've given us your savings," i.e. that's a negative interest rate, right? So we've all seen the billboards out the front of banks, "We'll give you this amazing return of 2.9% or whatever it is, and you're thinking, gee, that's low. But we're not far off. And in fact, in some parts of Europe and Japan, you've actually seen this, where the banks are advertising negative interest rates. And that's the thing that I wanted to talk about now, because it's just so amazing. And it's, it's the idea that not only do you, not consume the marshmallow, you have to make new marshmallows and give it back to the marshmallow giver.
I'll tell you, there's another interesting development, Bernard. Apparently there are now negative interest rate mortgages. And I think it's Norway or Denmark or something like that. Denmark. So you have a mortgage and the bank gives you money at the end of the month.
That's what we definitely need.
That's what we definitely need.
I'll
That'll
give
make a big
Adrian or a
difference,
call and say, get on with it with their negative interest rate mortgages. Anyone here work for a bank? No, I got a feeling that's not going to go down well with a bank. But anyway, at the moment, a third of the world's economy actually has negative short-term interest rates, and about 25% of the world's bonds, government bonds, are actually trading with negative yields. So that means that Germany or Japan, for example, can go out there into the financial markets and borrow money with negative interest rates. That means the pension fund or the bank will lend the government money and then pay the government extra on top of that to look after their money, which just seems bizarre to me. And I wonder, in this world of increasingly low savings rates, i.e. term deposit rates, remember we've got $160 billion in New Zealand term deposit accounts. Just imagine what we could do as a nation with $160 billion invested in actual assets that are actually doing things. And I wonder at some point, where do New Zealanders go, actually, that negative interest rate the bank's trying to charge me, or 0.0001 or whatever it is, the number they get. When do New Zealanders go, okay, that's enough, I'm going to invest the money?
They're doing it now.
Right.
Yep, they are absolutely doing it now.
So, and that will be interesting, because the Reserve Bank probably will cut the official cash rate again on November the 13th. By 25 basis points, so we'll have a 0.75% official cash rate. And then the term deposit rates, which, depending on which bank you're investing with, well below, well, depends what type of account you've got, but often below 2%, in many cases below 1%, you're going to head towards 0. And how should people think about that when they pull up their account and see 0.0001%, and by the way, we're charging you a monthly fee. Liz?
I think the way to look at money in the bank is that it's just a safe place to keep your money. It's there for liquidity. It's there for access. It's there so that when you need to spend it, you can take it out, and it's it's safe. So it's not a place to put your money to get a return on it. If you get interest on it, well and good, but that's not why it's there. So you should only have money in the bank that you plan to spend in the short term. Anything else needs to be invested for the long term in a higher returning asset class.
Yeah, that's what I can't work out. $160 billion is in term deposit or in cash accounts. So we're not going to have a disaster that requires everyone to suddenly withdraw $160 billion to buy lunch. That's a big lunch. Actually, that's about 50% of GDP, by the way. It's a half year. That's an amazing number. I'm always stunned to see that. Either that's people are extremely nervous, or they don't have obvious investment choices, or they just haven't thought about it.
Or they don't know about it.
They
and
don't
that's the
understand
challenge.
risk. Yeah,
For many people in the community that I work with, actually they don't know that these things exist. And there's often a lot of trust issues as well. You know, I have lots of people that go to the bank and often bring 3 or 4 forms of ID with them to prove that that's who they are in order to take out their money. So when you take, say, loan companies that charge higher percentage, up to what, 525% interest in some cases.
I still don't understand how that's allowed to go on. That's actually legal,
amazing.
but yeah.
But and so I guess what I'm saying is, look, you know, you don't know what you don't know, and I genuinely think that if people knew what options were available, knew how to access them, that they would do things with their money. But the reality is they don't, for a whole lot of reasons.
Yeah, and for a long time it was actually quite difficult to, you know, put money into other types of investments other than the bank. And the bank's got a big brand and frankly an implied government guarantee. And it's good to see that the banks are being forced to put more capital aside and essentially...
also thinking where they're investing as well. I mean, that's where ethical investing has also come in the last 10 to 15 years, you know. People don't want to invest in tobacco companies. Or if you remember, there were certain banks that will remain nameless that were investing in things like bombs and military. You know, you'll find that there are actually lots of New Zealanders with a conscience that don't want to either work towards killing people in this country or overseas, which is a great thing. I'd like to think that we actually care about people.
Although there's an evil part of me that wants to invest in an evil fund. One that only invests in tobacco and arms and, you know, asbestos and stuff. Anyway, sorry. There is. Yeah. Hey, we've had a lot of fun here talking, but I'm sure you've got some questions here today, and there'll no doubt be some questions from the audience out there on the Facebook live stream. So I wanted to open it up here for those people. I think we have a microphone or two for those people who are listening in online. So who has a question for our panellists or me? Who would like to, you know, dive in there? How are you thinking about investing at the moment? What are you seeing around your world that sort of got you interested in asking what's going on? Does anyone want to go on?
I don't think they do, but...
Oh no, here we go. Great.
So just got a question about KiwiSaver. So some people like leaving their money in the banks. I know some other people have like looked at long-term investment funds like Milford. I think Milford Investments is another one I know of. Where do you think the better? Well, obviously, from what I've heard, leaving money in the bank isn't a good option. But where do you think there's probably the safe or the better option for maybe people that like are starting out wanting to get a house in the next 3 years, 5 years, that sort of line?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question to ask. It is, what do I want to use the money for? Or what where am I in my life stages? You know, what are the things that really matter to me? If you, as you say, you know, you want to save really hard for a house deposit, well, you know, there's various ways you can do that that are relatively less volatile, because one of the risks is, you know, let's say you've found the perfect home in 3 years' time, and then you turn around to pull the money out of your investment or savings account. It just happens to be that, you know, Trump has said something really dumb the previous day, and the markets have tanked, and you don't get quite such your money out. So you have to think about, you know, when do you want to take the money out? If it's in 50 years' time, then you've got an ability, and you're ready to sort of wait, you don't actually need it right now, then you can think about investing with a bit more risk appetite. So really the question to ask is, you know, when do I need the money? How comfortable do I feel about taking a high risk or a low risk, so that when I get my money back in 3 years' time, I can be sure that it didn't just drop down sharply, you know, the day before I needed it. So that's sort of part of the question. But Liz, you answer these sorts of questions every day.
I think you've just answered it perfectly, Bernard. Would you like a job?
No, as I say often, I'm unelectable and unemployable.
So I
But
think
anyway.
once you've got your first home, yeah, I mean, if you're using KiwiSaver to save up for your first home, you want to keep it with that short investment time frame in mind, and don't be too aggressive with it. Once you've got your first home, then you've got a long way to go with your KiwiSaver, because it'll be in there till you're 65 at least. So that's when you can be a bit more growth oriented. But yeah, just those early years, you want to be thinking carefully about risk and volatility, especially going forward now, because we're going into a very volatile period.
And one of the things to think about is, particularly with KiwiSaver, now the government, both flavours of government, have said you can take out a chunk of money. And in fact, there's even been some changes in the last couple of months, which mean that you could take out with 3 or 4 other friends. I think it's up to $10,000 per person. Is that right?
I think it's in aggregate, it's $20,000 altogether.
Yeah. So two people, $20,000. And now you can get together with, your best friends and put together a deposit for a house that you share, which is interesting. That you'd have to really, really like them, I think. And that's important, because you actually get a grant, a matching grant, if you like, for the government when you're buying your first home. And that's something to think about. And KiwiSaver is a really effective way of getting people to save. It's used a particularly interesting concept in behavioural economics, which says essentially you make it really easy for people to do nothing and save, and that's essentially what KiwiSaver is about. Yeah. And so it is quite a good way to sort of force yourself in a really easy way to regularly put money aside. And that's one of the interesting things about Sharesies. Brooke, I mean, there's quite a few people who are what we would call dollar cost averaging, i.e. they are regularly putting in a certain amount of money regardless every week or every month or whatever it is, to take advantage of an interesting concept, which means that if you regularly put money in at a certain time, it's just a simple chunk, time after time after time, then you're actually better off than if you put big chunks in and take big chunks out and do lots of trading. And the same also on the other way around, when you're taking your money out, you just take it out in sort of a very regular drip feeding. It's a much better thing. I mean, Brooke, could you tell us in terms of, how people are investing? Are there people doing that, set and forget, $100 in a month or whatever it is, and make decisions around that?
Yeah, definitely. So we've got people who on Sharesies we call auto invest, which you can pick some of the portfolios or set up your own auto invest and have that feature, or making sure you're investing a certain amount as often as you like. But we see people, a lot of our customers doing that, and then also they have that strategy running, and they're like, okay, cool. Now I want to learn more about companies, and I really care about this company. Kathmandu became a B Corp. I really want to support companies like that, and then they start investing in companies that way too, and building their knowledge on how companies are performing and putting their money to work in that way. So we see people using both of those strategies in terms of that auto invest, having that feature continually go, and then building their company experience too.
So auto investing was one way to do it. And on that topic, and we've got a question here from out there online, how do you find out about this stuff that's happening day in, day out, that's changing people's views about where to invest or whether a company is going up or going down? I'll throw this one to you, Tom. I mean, how do you keep current in the world of investing and money and saving and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so we built a number of tools on Sorted to help make good decisions about which KiwiSaver fund to be in, and a lot of times if you get the right fundamentals right, then you really don't have to pay attention to every little thing that's going on, sending the markets up, sending the markets down. A lot of the time to get into that set and forget that you're describing. So I'd invite you, particularly on Smart Investor, which is a comparison engine that's not trying to sell you anything. It's just giving you a look at all the KiwiSaver funds that are available, all the managed funds that there are here in New Zealand, share offers here in New Zealand and bond offers, you can have a look and do some comparisons and see what's right for you. So when you're looking for a KiwiSaver fund, we were talking about that time horizon, but we've got a little widget on Sorted that really will point you in the right direction for what type of KiwiSaver fund is right for you and your circumstances. And it's really, as Bernard was saying, based on that time horizon and your comfort with the ups and downs. We don't want you to lose sleep as you're investing. You want to be at peace, but you really don't need to check in too often and panic.
And remember, it's long term. That's the whole point of an investment. I always tell people, don't look every single day. You'd panic if you saw how quickly things go. It really is about long term. Long term rather than short term.
It's one of the reasons why I'm not so keen about people having their balance right on their phone to look at all the time, because obviously if you checked in with something like your KiwiSaver account every quarter, you would see it go down every so often. If you check in every day, you're going to see it go down twice as often, right? And the chances of you panicking and actually jumping off a roller coaster midway through the roller coaster is a fairly dangerous thing to do.
And often when everyone else is doing the same thing, doesn't necessarily mean you have to jump in the same direction. And one story I like to tell is how in 2009, I went to a press conference where the then head of the New Zealand Superannuation Fund, Adrian Orr, who's now the Reserve Bank Governor, was talking about what he was doing right in the middle of the global financial crisis. You remember at that point, for those who are around there in 2008, 2009, we were literally hours away from a global banking collapse. And banks were freezing all over the world. Companies were falling and laying people off. There was a lot of pretty freaked out people around, and some pretty, well-educated people in fancy suits being pretty freaked. Anyway, Adrian Orr, who never does up his top button on his shirt, which I always admire, he said on that day in 2009. When everyone else is rushing out of the supermarket with their hair on fire going, run for the hills, I get my trolley and I dive in there and buy everything that's cheap on the shelves. Which was like, we were going, wow, gee, Adrian, that's our money you're playing with there at the super fund. And he said, no, I'm rushing in there to fill up my trolley when everything's cheap. And actually that's one of the reasons why the super fund has done so well over the last decade or two, is that some people, when everyone's running out the door yelling, fire, they just check in to see where the smoke is, go and find the good stuff which is still there. I got a feeling there's not too much good stuff in the Sky City Convention Centre, but anyway, that's
not worth a gamble.
No, that's not worth a gamble. Actually, that's another place to stay away from, is the casino.
Can I just chip in?
Sure, go for it.
In terms of where to get information, I think it's a really good idea to get together with other people who are investing and talk about stuff and share information. And for example, there's the New Zealand Share Association. I'm sure I saw Adrian in the audience somewhere from the NZSA. There's groups like that where you can tap into research that other people have done already, or just share information. It's just start talking about stuff rather than keep it to yourself.
And as a couples counsellor, before I decided that actually that was too tricky, one of the things that I often do is get people to bring their bank statements with them, because actually a lot of the fights were over money. So bank statements are really good.
Oh, that's a new business model. You can be a marriage counsellor and a financial advisor at the same time. Yeah.
But actually bank statements are a truth teller. They tell us exactly where our money is going. And so actually part of that, like you're saying, is having that conversation, not only with other people, but also within your own home. If you looked at things like our suicide rates, at one stage it was 20% of people in New Zealand that committed suicide was because of money. We have high mental health rates, anxiety, depression. Hey, it keeps me employed, but that's not the point. The point is, though, it's about how do we find people to work through all this stuff. And then once that's settled, then it's like, how do we then look at things like Sharesies using sources like Sorted, because for me it's an autonomous Crown entity under government, so they don't have a set agenda rather than getting Kiwis ahead.
Yes.
So it's all these different things that all play out.
Yeah, no, that's given me an idea for my daughter about how to give her the pocket money and getting her thinking about Sharesies and making sure that I have an access to her account so I can see what she's buying and selling. And as long as it's not lollies and ice creams, that's good. Just in terms of when should people start investing? I mean, when do you decide, okay, I've got enough in my bank account to deal with the little crises of the world? What's the moment when you need to, think, okay, I've got my little buffer. The buffer is this big. How big should it be? Liz?
You need a buffer of 3 months' living expenses, and then you also need to clear your debt, as you said before, Alexander. And then you start investing. But if you've got a mortgage, it's that balancing up of, do you pay down the mortgage or do you invest? I think it can be quite good to just get in the habit of investing while you've still got a mortgage. But probably the bulk of your spare money should just you should plough down that debt and just have a little bit going on the side to, learn about how to do it, because you'll need it later on in life.
That's right. And leverage, thinking about leverage is important, because the more leverage you've got, the more you win, and also the more you lose if there's a problem. And your appetite for risk is a really important thing. And I'm no doubt there are various tools out there in which you can assess your own appetite for risk. How risky do you feel, punk, so to speak? Where do you really want to go? So, do we have any other questions from the audience or from our online panel that we can answer here in the last 5 minutes or so of today's Share Club? Yes, the front.
Hey guys, thanks very much. Now, I'm firmly of the opinion that investment's a bit of a mindset. How we've got to try and steer ourselves away from the instant gratification of the marshmallow in front of us. So do you have any advice on how we kind of train ourselves? Because I guess we've all gone through high school education to become good employees. But how do we train ourselves to be investment mindset focused? And are there any books or materials that you'd recommend?
Well, I can give you a suggestion in terms of how. I think it's about how you reward yourself. It's like throwing some marshmallows in there and setting yourself some kind of quite small goals that you can achieve successfully, and then rewarding yourself for that. That's very much part of it, because the power of compounding. Just putting in. I think you've got a thing on your website, haven't you, where if you put $50 a week and here's how much you'd have now, kind of thing. It's just reinforcing that in you. We're no better than those, Pavlov's dogs, and that's how our brains work. So there's that, and just reading up. But once you see the impact of just putting aside a small amount and seeing that compound return, it's that's what changes your behaviour.
One thing I find really useful to get me thinking about investing and about long time and about risk and change in economy and society is to think about it in terms of stories and people. So one of the things I love doing is reading about really interesting business people or investing ideas or technology. And one thing I'd recommend is Walter Isaacson's book on Steve Jobs, which is a cracking read. What a story. A really difficult. I'd hate to have worked for him, but I have at least 7 of his devices, and I've contributed, quite a lot to Apple's profits over the years. And reading these stories and getting into the narrative of, what is a change in our society that generated a lot of wealth for someone, or destroyed a lot of wealth. And the way I think about it is through stories and people. So books, I'm a big reader of. I suppose you could call business and history books. And one thing I love to do to sort of understand, how things have come out of nowhere, because that's really what we're talking about when we invest, particularly for the long term, is to invest in an idea or a person or an asset that over the long run transforms into something that, is big and wealthy and interesting. And that's where I love looking around the world for ideas and things that I think, wow, that's really going to make someone rich. I'd quite like to get in on that. And just thinking about how people live and use stuff. So one of the things I love to do when I'm talking about investing in business and economy and that sort of thing is to get everyone to look into their phones, which is really easy to do because everyone's looking into their phones every 5 minutes. And just look at the apps they've got in their phones and think, what is it that I'm doing that everyone else is doing that I'm paying money to or not paying money to that's changing the world? And who's making money out of that? And that's what I love to do, is go down the rabbit hole of who's making money out of this and where are they and where are they listed, or how is that expressed in a way that I can get my hands on that. And that's why I think a lot of people invest in companies they understand because they use them. and because they understand the product, because a lot of people actually, people don't think they know much about business or investing, but actually what they really know well is how they use products and what their friends and families are doing with products and services. And if you can find out some more about that, dive down the internet holes and understand what's going on with that technology. And that's one thing I like to do, is occasionally I look at my phone to see which apps I'm using the most. And that will often tell me where things are going in an interesting way. One of the reasons I found, for example, Air New Zealand so interesting a decade or so ago is that I suddenly realised I was not talking to a travel agent. I was doing all of my booking online. I wasn't going to the comparison engines, because Air New Zealand was actually pretty good at making it easy for me to buy tickets. And also the budget airlines. I started to understand how that model worked. And stories, people, books, and also, as I would say this, as I'm a journalist, is read the news. And if we do our job well as journalists, we should be telling those stories in a way that's interesting and gets you excited about the world. Because ultimately, I think that investing is about being curious.
Two things for me. One is look in your environment and see, are there people that are supporting your vision or not? For me, if I was going to bungee jump for whatever insane reason, right, I wouldn't ask someone that had never bungee jumped before, what do you think of bungee jumping? I would actually want to talk to other people that have actually done it and understand what was the process that was involved. So that's the first thing.
Would you do it when they're doing it?
No, I wouldn't. I might invest in that equipment to keep them alive, but that would be it. So that's the first thing. I look at the environment and I ask myself, who's in my world right now that supports my perspective? Because the truth is that there are people that want to make a step towards investing, but then there are people that have good intentions. And any time someone says, look, I mean this from the bottom of my heart, it's just a warning sign. Think about, are they investors themselves? Actually, what evidence do they have that they're any good at it? The definition of madness is repeating the same thing and thinking that you're going to get a different example. And then the other thing I was going to think about, just using that investment analogy, is diversify your friends. So in my world, I'm a health professional, but then I also have people that work at corporate banks. People from corporate banks are really good for me to understand what's happening in the financial sector. They have no problems closing down churches and organisations, right? And then when we're meeting with my health professional and social professional, they're saying, this is so wrong. I look at all these different spaces and think, there's so much that I'm learning from all these different perspectives, right? How then can I apply that learning to get me ahead? And then I dismiss them and then do my own thing. Right. But that's what I'm saying anyway. So those two things, look at your environment. Does your environment allow you to move forward? And then look at the different friends. And don't be afraid to have friends that will question why you're doing this, because actually sometimes those are the friends that have helped me, question different investments that I've made in my own life.
Yes. So, Liz, you must try and keep an eye on what's going on. Got any good books or news sites or things that you religiously go to, apart from writing your own column, of course?
Well, there are some classics. There's like, The Millionaire Next Door, The Richest Man in Babylon, whatever. There's heaps of classic books out there, the old Rich Dad, Poor Dad thing. But I think you've always got to bear in mind, why are you investing? Because money, or the wealth that you create, has got to be spent by somebody. You've got to understand what it is that drives you. Now, entrepreneurs are driven by things other than wealth creation, funnily enough. The wealth they create is a byproduct of what they do. They're more into, take Warren Buffett as a classic example, He still lives his life the same way he did, when he was 20. So for him, wealth has no purpose, but he just loves the number crunching and being successful at what he does. So you've got to really understand, why are you wanting to create wealth? What's the purpose of that money for you? How is that money going to enable you to enjoy life more? And when you really get to grips with that, that will give you the motivation to do whatever you need to do. So if it's about security in your retirement, if it's about being able to retire early, about helping your kids, you've got to understand, what's the purpose of money in your life. When you truly come to understand that, you will always do the right thing.
On that note, that's a really good way to sort of finish up the evening, I think, and we're just at our end of the time allotted. So I wanted to thank our panellists for coming along today and having a good old natter about money and investing. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you have too. And we'll be around for a bit for those people who want to ask us questions. Just don't come too close because I'm still smelling like the Sky City Convention Centre. And please be safe and healthy going home, and good luck out there. And try not to look at Donald Trump's Twitter feed because that really is not good for anyone's health. Thank you very much. Cheers.